and welcome to the NestGen session for Building Blocks of Accessible Drone in a Box trial program. Firstly, I would like to thank our title sponsor, DJI Enterprise, and also the sponsor, Sunflower Labs. Also, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the team from FlightNow for hosting this fantastic event as well. My name is Jackie Dumovich. I am the CEO and founder of Hover UAV. I think this is my third year being involved with the NestGen, so excited to be back, and this year as a moderator. Hover UAV is based in Australia, and we're a regulatory approvals that extra support companies go to get their regulatory approvals. We've got a great speaker this session, and we're going to run this session a little bit different from normal. We're going to do it more like a fireside chat. The speaker tonight is Ed Boxall, the Managing Director from Sensorum. We've actually known each other for a little while, so we thought we'd just have a conversation throughout this session. Ed, welcome, and if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jackie. Great to be here. Good to see you again. And thank you also for Flightbase for inviting me to share some knowledge on this particular topic. I have a passion with regards to the drone in the box solution. And welcome to everyone that's viewing this session at the moment, wherever you may be around the world. Even in the chat when it started about an hour ago, just seeing people from all over the world, the US, Poland, in the Middle East. But before we begin, Jackie, just a quick shout out to the Sensorum team that's around Australia. Also our friends and colleagues from the many Aerodyne Group subsidiaries and partners. We're an Aerodyne subsidiary. So I'm sure there are plenty of the Aerodyne Group subsidiary and partner people that are listening to this session or watching this session. So I'm Ed, Managing Director at Sensorum. We are a drone service provider, but even more than that, we're about technology integration, digital transformation. So we integrate cutting-edge drone and remote sensing technologies, plus AI-driven software into various aspects of our clients' businesses. Sensorum's been around for over a decade now, providing really unique services to agriculture, critical infrastructure, utility, and mining. In 2020, we joined the Aerodyne Group, and that really did allow us to boost our opportunities in Australia. So yeah, that's me. I'm located in Perth. Jackie, I know you're on the other side of the country, so it's 6 o'clock in the evening, so it's quite a reasonable time for me. So, and I appreciate there are a lot of people out there that are early in the morning. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Ed, for joining. Also, just a reminder, this session is being recorded, so we can watch at a later date as well. Also, please start posting your comments in the chat, even if it's just to tell us where you're from at the moment or what time it is as well. As Ed said, I'm on the east coast of Australia, so it's pushing just 8 o'clock at night. So luckily I've got the kids to bed, so hopefully there's no interruptions coming from behind me throughout the session as well. So let's get started, Ed. You've got some fantastic work that you're doing, as you said, through, mining and utilities, and talk about drone in the boxes with me.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. Thanks, Jackie. So I presume you can see can you see the slide there, Jackie?
We can. If you want to just press, not yet.
Okay, let's see if we can get this up and running. So.
It's up now. I can see it.
I think someone in the background has got involved there, Jackie. So, I think before we start the slide, or this first page, and when we chat about this particular project that we're involved in at the moment, it's currently ongoing, but just drone in a box projects in general, I think it's worth noting that it's just you and me here, but it takes a large, talented and dedicated group of people to make this projects happen. So it's not just the staff within Sensorum, it's also our contractors, suppliers, and our client who are committed to constantly thinking outside the box, excuse the pun, and helping make this project successful. And full transparency, Hover UAV was obviously integral in that from a regulatory side of things. So for those out watching, that's Hover UAV did a fantastic job on that side. And so you'll provide some really interesting insights for us with regard to this project. So thank you, Jackie.
Thanks for the plug.
So yes, yeah, no worries. Building blocks for a successful drone in a box program. I don't think that a year or a year and a half ago, I would have thought that I would be sitting here talking about 6 nested drone solutions or drone in a box sitting out in regional Western Australia being operated from the room that's right behind me, sort of, 14, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. So this is super exciting how quickly the technology is changing. So maybe Jackie, if you could give us a bit of a rundown on this, on ConOps, and what does that mean? And for this project?
Definitely. ConOps is definitely something. And look, I know that everyone's in different parts of the world, so sometimes I might relate back to sort of SORA or the JARIS SORA quite a little bit as well. It's a methodology used from the Drone Associations of Rulemaking for Uncrewed Systems. There's probably, there used to be 62 countries last time I looked, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot more countries around the world utilising now. So a lot of the terminology I use from that we'll talk through our conversation today, and ConOps is one that they define. But basically, I think it's really crucial, and I'm sure, look, I'll pass back to Ed soon to talk about their concept of operation, but coming up with a plan of why you're doing something. So what are you going to do? What is the outcome? What height you're flying, what you want to fly, all of those details is so crucial. We're going to talk a little bit about the regulatory side later, but not having a firm idea of how you're going to do it and what you're going to do really mucks you up later on as well. Because, if you're saying that, you're flying in a farm or a mine or, from a police station roof or whatever you may do, there's different risks associated with that. So then the regulatory process or the type of equipment you need may change. So a concept of operation is really all of those different elements from, as I mentioned, where you fly, what you're going to use, all the safety equipment you're going to use. It's all of that information that then can be utilized to further develop your safety plan and your testing parameters and things like that. So Ed, tell us about how you got started with your ConOps. Was it your idea or was it your client's idea?
Look, I think it was a bit of both, to be honest. I think they had a problem that they knew that they were going to eventually use remote sensing technologies. They didn't know what it was going to be. And I think often we see clients that come to us and they have certain expectations on what this technology can do, but they don't really have an understanding of some of the regulatory issues that might occur. And so I think it's about sitting down with people, with clients, and giving them really clear expectations. Getting those ideas and then forming them, saying, hey, look, this is what I think we can do now, and this is what we can move to in the future. And that's exactly for this project. That's what we did with the client. So they had an issue with regards to collecting data at remote sites that were often unmanned at this time of the year, particularly. And they can't have people everywhere. They've got over 100 sites that are in these remote and regional areas. And so we gave them a proposal on how we could potentially solve that problem. Talked about timelines from sourcing equipment, sourcing software, timelines with regards to approval processes, writing these risk assessments, and then obviously the big one is how much does it all cost? Obviously this technology is quite new, and so the pricing for these sort of things can be a little bit in the air until we really start to get down to the nitty-gritty and say, this is exactly what we're going to do, this is where we're going to fly, this is the height we're going to fly, etc. So from us, the first thing that once the client knew what we understood what the client wanted to achieve, then we had to set about selecting equipment and software. I suppose for us, we were pretty lucky being part of the Aerodyne group. We were able to travel to Malaysia where we had a number of different drone in a box solutions. So we had a look at those. And then we basically decided on using the DJI dock in the end. obviously the reason, there's always reasons for using different solutions. And for us, the DJI dock was really just about having access to suppliers in our region. And that also boiled down to with regards to software, where we chose the Flight Hub 2 because we had resellers in our region. We're quite remote. Perth is one of the most remote capital cities in the world. So to be able to have equipment, inevitably with this technology, equipment can fail. And if you need to get that to the client pretty quickly, we need to have resellers. So that's how we went about selecting the equipment.
Yeah. Selecting equipment's definitely sort of, a big part of it. I've been involved in a few trials now early on for drone in the boxes, and have trialed, multiple systems from, Percepto to Hexatronics to OmniDock to the DJI dock to Hexatronics docks. And, picking that right selection, there's no one solution for everyone at this stage, I think, as well. So it's sort of, understanding, like what we said about the ConOps, understanding what you need and what data you need to collect to make sure that, you're going to have the hardware that's suitable for that job, and the suitable drone or the RPA that you need, and then the suitable software as well. Not every software is exactly the same. So some software are more designed for, survey, and some might be more designed for inspections and things like that. So it's really selecting your right equipment that's right for you. And when you're doing these trials, or if you're doing a trial in the future, you might be trialing multiple at the same time as well, just to really define what you need.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people who are moving into this into this technology, to doing some trials, to understand that there's not one solution that's going to solve all those problems. And then it's about how does that shape your risk assessment? How do you go back to the client and say, hey, look, it's just, there are multiple solutions. It's not, you're not going to be able to solve all of your problems with the technology as it is now. But we think we found a solution that will work best. So from there, I think we moved on to then working out the parameters for the project. What that equipment and the software, how that was going to work on our client's site. And then we just had to work out the parameters that we set.
What were the sort of the goals? Was it, to be able to collect, like, was it, to see if you could get through the regulatory, or was it to see, if the hardware would withstand, or was it just to see if it could do, they really only cared about the data and the end product, and weren't that fast on the process as long as you got to the end?
Look, we were very lucky with this particular client. They actually have a in-house innovation department. Now, you can imagine they're really enthusiastic about this sort of technology and other remote sensing technology. So they had an open mind. They knew that this was obviously trying to solve a problem that they had on site, but it also, they were very interested in how does this technology survive the harsh conditions of Australia. So we have had, like, for example, today out on site, it's been about 25 degrees Celsius, but it was 46 degrees Celsius last week. So how do these systems survive? Does the air conditioning work? It's dusty environment. So they were very interested in that. I mean, we'll come to this a little bit later on when we're talking about recording, and what's the success of, how do you measure the success of a project? But they wanted to make sure all of these things, were these systems portable? Could they pack them up and move them to another site if they wanted to do another trial somewhere else? So, they were some of the things we discussed with the client.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I'm seeing as well at this stage. It's, making sure it can fit. During a test and a trial, it's how that they can fit it into their workflow as well. So they want to know, what involvement, what is the reliability. The weather is a huge thing here in Australia. It's like, and especially on some of our mines, there's a lot of red dust trying to get into all those little crevices, or there's, I know Paul's speaking today as well from Surf Lifesaving. Otherwise we've got a lot of coastal environments where there's a lot of sea salt and things like that. So definitely seeing how that they withstand, which, at this stage, some of them are doing okay. And we've, some that, that have had some easy fixes, like, just some extra seals and things, but, everyone's still trying to obviously it's still trials for a lot of these drone in the box manufacturers.
Yeah, agreed. Look, once we got to that point where we had decided on what the parameters were, we knew what the problem that needed to be solved, we'd selected the drone, we'd selected the software, then we went about gathering people around us, like yourself, Jackie, and Hover UAV, plus IT specialists, people that create, VHF radio over the internet. We got all of those suppliers and contractors together. We chose the right ones that had the same vision as us and also our client. We needed to make sure those people that were around us were solution focused, because we knew that we were going to come across technical issues, regulatory issues along the way. And so we had to select the right team, which I think, looking back now, 100% we did. So that was good. So that's the most important thing. And that's the most important advice when you start something like this. It's a long journey, and those that are around you need to be solution focused and realize that it's not potentially as easy as it seems when you read the user manual. It's not just putting a drone in a box solution out on site and away you go. There are quite a lot of other bits and pieces that go on behind the scenes.
Yeah, agree.
All right, I'll move on to the next slide. This is your area of expertise. I did watch in wonder as this unfolded over the first few months of this project. So I'm going to let you talk about the basics of how this process works.
Yeah, definitely. And look, for those, I know that you can often look back on the Flightbase and Flight Now website and some of the old ones. Over the last 2 years, I have actually done some full SORA overview for drone in the boxes. But as mentioned before, we do use the SORA methodology here in Australia. And surprisingly, I see so many surveys come out on LinkedIn saying, what are the biggest challenges that, people from around the world are facing for this sort of integration? And regulatory seems to be at 80%. Touch wood. Look, we're doing all right in Australia. We're sort of, the regulatory process is going on. And some of you might go, I'm going to say, oh, you know what, it took 3 to 4 months. It was so slow. And then I'll probably get some comments back in the feedback. It takes a year or 2 years where you are. So we're really lucky that, Australia, we are a very large country. We have low ground risk, so low population density, and our air risk is not that high as well, which is a great place to start beyond visual line of sight. So we follow the normal beyond visual line of sight methodology and filling out the SORA, looking at what are those risks? Where are you actually flying? Are we expecting? Don't forget, you're not on site anymore. Most drone in the box companies that are doing trials, like Ed, and I think I might be able to see it in the background where his remote operations is, but they're flying from an office, sometimes in a different state or definitely in a different location. So you've got to start thinking, well, you've often used your eyes before to mitigate the risk. So, you've looked around and said, yeah, there's no air traffic, or, there's no people, but you're using other tools. So you may be using, radio. I know Ed mentioned VHF before. You may be using things like NOTAMs and cameras, or whatever the other mitigation measures are. You've got to start thinking about how you're going to mitigate that risk to the air and the other air users, and also the people on the ground as well. That's sort of where you start. And then there's just a lot of paperwork, but as I said, it really comes down to, if you've got a defined concept about operation, you can work out what risk you have. And then once you know your level of risk, you can start working out the solutions to try to solve that.
I'll add to that, Jackie, just when we went through this particular process, we realised that what we would want to do for the height and the area, particularly for where we wanted to, that it really wasn't necessary for us to actually be that high or go that far out on this particular site. And I think it was about saying, this is our ideal situation for our client, and then we can actually then just shrink that down. It then makes it easier to get this process across the line with the regulator. And I think that's what we found. And it keeps everyone happy. So it keeps timelines on track. And I think that it's important to understand that a regulator, particularly in Australia, I'm sure in other places around the world, they're still learning as well. And often they're learning from people like Sensorum and Hover. They're learning all of these things and they're gathering data. but they're taking a cautious approach to start with. So I think it's just about being sensible and saying, what do we really want to achieve here?
Yeah, I think every country around the world I still don't really get it because I love to just run, but they love the crawl, walk, run approach as well. So, yeah, like defining or pulling in those areas, or, if you've got this grand plan of doing it on, a trial on 20 sites, but then you realize 2 are right near an airport, or, 2 are right near, a football field or somewhere where it's quite busy. It might just be pulling back those areas a little bit, moving the operational volume, or just say, hey, you know what, phase 1, get that regulator on site, like get that experience and the data of the reliability, start on some other sites and then expand out. So it's really, knowing where you're going to operate. The one big thing that we find that people jumping to BV loss in that thing, you really need to know your equipment. So you need to know what your fail safes are. Some people have been flying for years and they don't really understand, what is the latency and what's all the different requirements. But there's so many different elements from, sorry, I'll throw back to Edu, the communication links is a huge one that, you've got to try solve. You're now flying in a different location. So do you want to just actually, I'll pass to you for this one. What are you using for communications? Are you using Starlink or?
Yeah, so I think for us, we were very fortunate that some of the stars aligned and we had the opportunity to use Starlink. It's available right across Australia now. 12 months, a year and a half ago, it wasn't. So we are using Starlink, which gives us a great connection back to our office here in Perth. So we're about 500 to 600 kilometres away from where the actual nested drone solutions are located. So we use Starlink to send back VHF radio over the internet. We also use that for the CCTV camera. The cameras that come on the DJI dock, for example, are okay for having a look at what's happening right there at the drone to make sure the props are okay, etc. But it doesn't give you a full 360-degree view of that area at an appropriate height. So we had to add in a CCTV camera and obviously then VHF. So it's all just streaming back to our office at pretty high speed, which is great. So the latency is really low. I suppose the other thing, though, as far as just, we looked at some of these areas and they looked like they were in the middle of nowhere. We saw an airstrip. It didn't look like anyone was going to be there or landing there. It was pretty overgrown with grass. So the research that went into actually finding out who goes and lands at these airstrips. You can't put someone there just for 12 months and just hope that you'll find that one person that uses that airstrip. So it's about doing a lot of research with, local authorities and councils, people that maintain those airstrips, to say who comes in here, how often do they come in here, to make sure that the regulator was happy that we'd done enough research to say that we had a very good understanding of what was going on. How often does the local park get used by sporting teams that's really close to the site? Those sort of things. The regulator was saying there's no excuse to say, well, we went there on one day and there was no one there, so no one uses it. That's not good enough. So a lot of research goes on into it. So I would say my advice to people is be patient and do a lot of research because you want to be informed about what's going on these particular sites, and going there for a week may not be enough of a snapshot. So, our sites were also unique because although we have a lot of mining, which is very safety orientated and closed off, the areas that we're operating are actually near homes, residents that have a right to feel safe with drones flying around on these sort of remote operations.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that concept of operation may change. When you're there, you're working with, in a trial situation, you're working with a client. It's always good to look at that regulatory aspect before the client goes, you know what, I'm going to pick this and I'm going to pick this area. Try to get them to pick 5 areas and then do a regulatory analysis on those areas. You just don't want to go in really hard to start with and say, right, I'm going to fly right near Sydney Airport as my very first drone in the box trial when the air risk is really high. So it's really important that, the regulatory requirements also is taken into consideration with the ConOps. And you might actually, start going through this safety case and go, this is not going to work very hard. Or, you know what, it can work, but there are a lot of regulatory from around the world, it might be a longer process. So, sometimes harder it is, it's just, might be a year wait, or need to get third-party certification, or there's different components. Also, you might need additional equipment. They might so the cost goes up. So the drone in the box is not the only elements. I've heard it's just been talking about all these other elements he put in there from a safety perspective, because he needed to get that through the regulatory safety case. So, we saw fencing, he saw cameras, and all of those elements all come into that cost of the project. So that's one thing we see a lot of people when they start the trial. They go, wow, we just saw a brochure for this box and this drone, and it's, this small amount of money, we can make this work. But really, we're sort of seeing it's like double or triple that cost for the hardware. Is that what your experience was, Ed?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, our client expected that there were going to be cost increases. So we tried to keep those to a minimum, which was great. But definitely, it's not just the cost of purchasing a dock unit. The comms cabinet, for example, was obviously more expensive. And then you get things like even a Starlink. You start streaming, and it might sound like it's unlimited data streaming, but all of a sudden you're recording every single time you fly. You are now uploading that data every time the drone lands, and you get unexpected costs that come in. Not huge, but certainly unexpected. I think I'll just touch on, before I move to the next slide, I probably also we need to touch on the fact that because we were operating in these 6 locations near homes, the privacy issue is something that does not necessarily come up with the regulator, but absolutely has to be considered, because again, these people who are neighbouring to these particular sites, they're not necessarily involved in this process, and obviously most of the drones that we're operating are carrying camera sensors, and so people obviously have the right to their privacy. So it's something quite new, particularly in these regional areas. It's new technology, and all of a sudden there's a camera that's pointing potentially near their homes. Obviously that's not the focus, but that's the reality. So it's about also engaging with people and making sure they feel comfortable with the fact that there's a drone with a camera that's potentially going past and looking near where their house is. So that was something which was really important to us to consider, and also the client. That was probably one of the biggest issues. The client knew that this was going to be safe, but how would we manage the privacy issue? And so I think we got to a really good position on that, but I think it's something that sometimes gets missed.
Yeah, and sounds like you did that. And I mean, social license is an issue that, we sort of face within the drone industry, and it's something that, may hinder growth in the future. We're also lucky in Australia, for those that are watching from this or others that might want to look, there's a website called drones.gov.au run from our Department of Infrastructure. They've got a very, very long name, but they give guidance out to general public about privacy, also to local councils and things like that. So we are actually allowed to, they don't own, I know in some other countries like the UK, it's quite different, but in Australia, you don't actually own any of the land over your property. So legally, drones are allowed to fly in and around those areas. Legally, there is still some privacy issues, and definitely a social license. So it's still very, very good practice, like what Ed and his team did by engaging them as well.
All right. So this is, for us, this was, we had all of those things in place, Jackie. We had the paperwork in with the regulator. Now we need to start preparing for that first flight. So staff training and licensing, they're sort of things that we weren't prepared to commit to initially until we knew that it was something that we're going to get over the line. The project was actually going to start. We were, again, very fortunate. The stars aligned again with regards to licensing. So in Australia, we moved away from the traditional IREX exam, which my background is an airline pilot. So I'd done the IREX 20-something years ago, and it was challenging back then. And so for people who were not in the manned aircraft industry, that was, I would imagine, quite overwhelming. And so they appropriately created a new exam called Beyond Visual Line of Sight, OCTA. So we basically send our staff on training courses, and proud to say that a number of our staff passed that exam and were basically ready to operate once we got our training instrument. Obviously, what you see here, this is Hamish, our chief remote pilot. He's in our rock, enjoying himself there, set up, very comfortable. It was basically making sure that our whole setup and our whole rock was set up appropriately. It was comfortable for hours and hours of use. So things like that, that human-machine interface, the latency had to be really good. We couldn't afford to have any breakdown in that. But just the general setup, and you can see he's got the CCTV camera up on the left-hand side on the iPad. He's got a UPS providing backup power, 2 screens that provides him all the information he needs. Interestingly enough as well, we have a dedicated phone on that desk. We put signs up on all of the sites on the fencing around, and so if we needed to speak to somebody or someone needed to speak to us, there was a number you could call that rang straight through to Hamish. Interestingly enough, I was sat in there, the Rock, a couple of weeks ago with Hamish, and someone came up and leaned up on the fence to watch the drone take off, which obviously we need them to go back at least 15 metres. He was able to talk to them through that CCTV camera and said, "Hey, can you see the sign there? It's got a number. If you call that number on your phone," it rang, and he was able to give that person some information about what was going on and what he needed that person to do. So from there, once it was all set up, we had all the docs in place. We were happy with the latency. We were happy that we had VHF comms. You can see on the right-hand side of that screen, on the right screen there, all the VHF comms set up, ready to go. Then it was just a matter of practicing the missions. But at this point, as you know, Jackie, there was no test instrument to operate beyond visual line of sight from a remote operation centre. So it required someone to be in the rock behind me, and also someone to be on site. So it was really watching the operation from in the rock while someone actually manually controlled the drone with a traditional controller.
I think because there might be people from all different, I might break down a little bit. So obviously visual line of sight's visual line of sight. Extended visual line of sight, how we refer to it here in Australia, is very similar to how BVLOS is run with the FAA and other people. It's really beyond visual line of sight from the pilot, but you're using a visual observer to clear that air and the ground risk on that site. And when Ed and I have been talking about BVLOS or beyond visual line of sight here in Australia, it usually utilises just the remote pilot in command at an operations centre or wherever they are, with no one on site as a visual observer, utilising their tools and equipment like you can see in that photo to mitigate those risks.
The other thing is just on site, just making sure that we had all the required fencing up. We had the required distances. It requires tape measures to make sure that we were 15 metres from the nearest building. And to be able to do that 15-metre distance, we needed to make sure that the people on site were actually informed prior to going on site. So otherwise, we would have had to push out to 30 metres, and then that was going to make it difficult. So we needed to make sure that there were signs that were on the entrance to the site. These are grain receival sites, by the way. These are not mining sites. So as people drive in, they need to be made aware by the signage when they sign in. They're given some information or a small risk assessment and information about staying away from the dock or the fencing, and then on the actual fence itself, some more information about that. So that all had to be in place before we even started any of these sort of preparation flights.
The few trials that I've been on, the site infrastructure or where you're actually going to put the box is actually been one of the hardest and sometimes the most costly, like trying to work out or building that infrastructure required to make it work long term as well. Often trials are sort of done either like, portable, it might have solar panels or generators, but, to run this long term, trying to find locations where, you've got often drone in the boxes, you might be running by, Starlink or LTE from the remote operations center through to the box, but the box often still communicates to the drone by radio frequency. So you still need electronic line of sight in that way. So, you need to find a spot that's, suitable, that you're not going to be flying over a hill or, behind some sort of building that you're going to lose that electronic line of sight as well. yes, you need to make sure you've got, power, good open area, and connectivity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were some of the things that we always work on, expect the unexpected. And there was a lot of challenges, even just the slope of the ground. It was not easy in the middle of nowhere, getting a bobcat out to go and move the ground to make sure that it was all really level. Once we had that all on set up, this is what our setup looks like. So we've got our Starlink, we've got the CCTV, we've got the comms box. It's all connected. It's all fenced off appropriately, and then we've got it connected to the DJI dock. This was the most exciting part. This is where we started to learn a lot of things. So we had to do our sort of final kind of sign off on all of our staff to make sure that they were all approved from a licensing point of view, and that they were comfortable, that they were going to be operating something completely unique. They were all very familiar with flying drones, but this was a completely different kettle of fish. So that was just about, making them feel comfortable and doing something completely new. One of the biggest things with these test flights is talking over VHF radio. So you're now potentially talking with manned aircraft. Now, I know in the drone world, we make broadcasts on a handheld VHF radio sometimes if we're around an airport, but that can often be really overwhelming for someone for the first time. All of a sudden, an aircraft is now talking back to you. How do you talk to that manned aircraft? I think manned aircraft pilots probably take that for granted. They're making radio calls all the time. So that was quite overwhelming, I think, and the guys have got used to that now. We also needed to get the regulator to provide us with a test instrument, which I think is actually a fantastic idea. So you don't have all the pressure of doing the assessment. They basically look at what you've provided, all the risk assessments, you tell them about what you set up, and they now allowed us to go to one site and test out some of our procedures with tight conditions and restrictions around that. Obviously, that's a fantastic way to approach an assessment in a month's time, because if they came and did an assessment and it was the very first time, you're gonna learn a lot on that day, and you probably are not going to pass that assessment. So I thought that was a great way. It allowed us to basically look at what we had written, and as far as our procedures are concerned, all of the things in our mind that we imagined how it would work, and then how that actually translated in the real world. So we were able to then go and say, hey, this is what actually happened. Let's make some amendments to the procedures before we go to our final assessment. And obviously that's where we came back to you, Jackie, and said, hey, look, this is some of the things, and you guys went and rewrote some of the procedures. So I think that the regulator really appreciated that, because they believe in this continual improvement. And again, like I was saying before, they are learning a lot from us, as well as us taking advice from them.
Well, at the beginning of this session, while we were waiting on the behind the scenes chat, Ed and I how are we going to do 45 minutes? That's a lot of talking. And I should have realized that, we're both so passionate about drone in the boxes and, getting everyone to use drone technology. It would come up really quickly. So we've only got 5 minutes left.
Yes.
For this session. We've got one question in here. I know we're going to move to the next session, but this will still fall into it. So from Benjamin, how do you maintain BVLOS connectivity? So obviously with the RF, how do you ensure that? I'm just going to quickly answer that. Depending on the level of risk is what you are required to keep that connectivity. So often, depending on what country you're from, they may ask for, your phone service provider, your agreement. And then you have to just do that testing. So you have to ensure that, you have that latency. You've got to do viewshed analysis to make sure you're going to have signal over that area as well. But Benjamin, if you do want any further questions, please, offline, come and contact me and I can go through that as well. I'm going to jump through to Ed's live project now. So let's just talk about his day-to-day. They're
Yes.
now up and flying every day, which is fantastic. All that lovely long, which I think took about 4 months in total, Ed, from beginning to end, from that concept of operation through to that instrument being issued for you.
It did. And I'm going to keep this one quick, Jackie, because I know we're running out of time. But look, the live project has been fantastic. We got all those NOTAMs organised. We've had people come up and we've had to manage curious onlookers in the project. But I think the important bit is we've been recording all the data. We've been making sure that we store all that information, because we know that that information will be used for future safety cases, so that we can move to one to many and that sort of type of operation. So we expected, and we had a sort of a philosophy of expect the unexpected. We always do. Things like drone pilot fatigue. A drone pilot sitting for sort of 14 hours. They've got to have big breaks in the middle of the day. We had power outages on the day we had assessment. The power went off site for a week. I mean, who would have thought? Just a massive storm came in and took power out of, I think it was something like 2,000 square kilometres, the power went out. So that gave us some challenges, but we were prepared for it. And it's really enabled us to build our confidence throughout this process. So how did we define a successful drone in a box project? Everything worked as expected. The procedures that we had and the deliverables providing to the client are as we expect. To date, we've provided this unique technology. It's reduced the amount of people on site. We can operate 24/7, 7 days a week, and we can basically solve the problems that the client had. We're on scope. The quality was exceeded our expectations. We're on schedule. Costs. Everyone knows that these things don't always work out. That there were variations. They were minimal, but ultimately it was a safe operation, or it is a safe operation where we're providing solutions to our client. And through this process, this is the best bit about this whole project, is we're seeing so many interesting, surprising value adds that we can provide to the client using this technology. These drones, they carry speakers, lights, thermal cameras, and it's amazing what we've been able to say to the client. Hey, these are other things that we can provide to you, and they're super excited about the future. So really just getting to the end here, Jackie, what next from here? I mean, I know a lot of people are right at the beginning, but for us, we're already looking at as to what's next. Thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think the next thing, this year we're sort of seeing lots of trials and testing. I think the late 2024 and 2025, for especially us here in Australia, will be looking at how do we actually scale that now? How do we move from one to many? Ensuring software companies, it's still looking into that human machine interface and how you manage, how you're managing 6 different or 7 RPA from one pilot, from sort of one computer. How do you do that? That's sort of what I think is going to be next. They're looking at scaling. And I mean, this is probably a whole other topic you probably talk on like hours for, but the airspace integration will come, I think, as we start to sort of go to busy areas and we want to start integrating where there's, crop spraying and other areas. We're going to sort of need to ensure that we've got the right tools to integrate into the airspace as well.
Yes. Look, just a quick question that's come up, Lee. Has there been any problem with the drone or the dock? I think, cross fingers, so far we've been really lucky. We're doing approximately 30 flights each day, starting from about 5:30 in the morning through to about 7:30 at night. So 30 flights, that's across 6 sites. So far, we haven't seen any issues at all, ranging, from really windy conditions through to kind of, 46 degrees Celsius. There inevitably are going to be problems. It doesn't matter what solution you choose, what drone, what nested drone solution, there will be problems, I'm sure. For us at the moment, it's just about keeping an eye on the maintenance that's required, seeing any trends. But yeah, so far, so good.
Yeah, look, I've done trials that haven't been successful. It doesn't mean, it might just be that it's earlier. I've tried multiple different drone-in-the-box solutions, and sometimes the software is not quite integrated, or we've had, only 75% precision landing, which, depending on the site, may not be suitable. That's why we sort of say, do trials and make sure you find, obviously, Ed's found the right source for his project. the next project he might have to change softwares and do different things, but it's finding those right things that work for that concept of operation. But I can see someone saying, but being patient is is definitely something you have to do with doing this.
Yeah, and I think if you're not patient with this technology, potentially you're in the wrong game. So I think this sort of technology is rapidly evolving, and look, we've seen plenty of drone sort of solutions over the years, not just related to this sort of that haven't worked out. You have to be patient. The technology will come, and I think it's just we're prepared to crawl for a little while, and then we'll walk, and then we'll run. So. No, it's exciting times, Jackie, and I really appreciate the opportunity to run through this project. It's been exciting.
Perfect. Well, look, Ed and I are both sort of on LinkedIn, so, connect through to us. If you've got any questions or you're interested in the regulatory side, please come and ask me. If you're interested in, sort of getting Ed and his team to do some trials, reach out. We're more than happy to sort of talk offline as well. I'm sure you echo that, Ed.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the sessions that are happening from here on in. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you all, and enjoy your evening, morning, day, whatever time zone you're in.